Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. This morning I'm looking at a book on Earth governance which has come to us for review from Edward Elgar Publishing Limited. They're independent family business of publishers in the West Country in Cheltenham. They produce a very high quality of research material which I find very helpful in the legal and academic world. Also, it's of interest, I think, to practitioners. The book I'm looking at this morning has got a subtitle, Trusteeship of the Global Commons. And I think you can get a picture of what that means. It's been written by Klaus Bosselmann, and it's part of the Edward Elgar New Horizons in Environmental and Energy Law series. It's available as an e-book as well as a standard book. It's a hardback, actually. And Elizabeth and I read the book, had a talk about it, and then we gave it a title for our review, a must-read treatise on environmental problems and their possible solutions. Now let's have a look at the book first of all. It's, as I say, it's a smallish book, hardback. There's the front cover there, the spine. Then at the back you've got a bit of detail about the author. You've also got a lot of information and some quotes about the book itself. The book also has a useful index. Last page is page 300, so 300 pages. It's actually page numbers for the index as well, so you shouldn't have too much difficulty finding what you're after. Now, what you do have in this book is a fairly substantial bibliography right at the end. So it's slightly differently organised from some of them. You've got the bibliography, and there, right after the bibliography there are some selected websites. Of course, there are a lot of websites now available, and we're getting more of this actually coming in these books. There are the websites just at the bottom there, and there as well. But it is useful to have websites because in this day and age I do tend to have a book and my computer on so that I can link to everything that I'm actually looking at. And that's really the way of research today. Now, we've got quite a lot of footnoting, which you can see at the sides. There is numbering, but not paragraph numbering as such. You do have in some of the chapters, but you do have paragraph numbering in others, so it can be reasonably easy to find, but it's not necessarily the case in every single article. There's the New Horizons series of books, and then the front page of Earth Governance. Then the details online, and then there's a dedication which I like to show from the editor. And then you've got a preface, and you've got a total of 9 chapters with a conclusion at the end. The preface is very interesting because he sets out the historic backcloth, if you like, to where this has come from. It was written in April 2015, so it's very, very new book. And then we go straight into the book itself. You see a little quote from Franklin D. Roosevelt, then an introduction, and you can see there's just the normal paragraph numbering, and then there is, in this case, it's subheads with numbers, but in some of them you do actually have, for instance, in the Global Commons itself, that title, you do have 4.1 paragraph numbering and so forth. So you can see that some of the chapters are slightly different, but it's a good book. It's actually, I found it quite an easy book to read, I must say. Anyway, I'd like to thank Klaus Bosselmann very much for producing it, and this is really what we say about the book. Environmentalists, particularly environmental lawyers, will be fascinated by this book, published recently by Edward Elgar Publishing Limited. It's written by the well-known environmentalist Klaus Bosselmann, and it's more rather than less a wake-up call for the preservation of Earth's increasingly threatened environment and the eventual and now urgent need for a shift from state-centred governance by individual nation-states to what is termed Earth-centred governance. I'm trying to say censored, but it isn't, it's centred, Earth-centred governance. What that means is that instead of leaving it up to individual member states and organisations, we've got to look at it in the global context, and that's really where he's coming from. It's common sense, and probably will be in 30 years' time, what I'm saying today, but in 2015 we still have not got our head around some of the really urgent problems we need to deal with. It's not too late, but we've got to get on with it. We've got enough of the natural world out there to deal with without ruining it even further. And that basically, I think, is one of the views that comes across, especially in the more vulnerable areas like the Pacific and the large, quite unvisited areas of the planet, because we actually do tend to huddle in the cities, and so it's useful to get a much bigger perspective on it all. At the core of this shift then from nation to Earth governance, says Bosselman, is the concern for the global commons, that is, the oceans, the atmosphere, the entire biosphere. So the commons in this case is everything we're looking at. And remember how much of the planet is water. We are warned that if we lose these, which is what is happening quite relentlessly in response to such factors as climate change, we are in danger of losing our local commons such as livelihoods, knowledge and the cultural sphere. One, of course, is tempted to remark here that largely uncontrolled international terrorism, civil strife, repression, dictatorship, fanaticism and brutality, and the resulting collapse of infrastructure and government, as is seen in the Middle East, and as I record this in Syria in particular at the moment, we can do a better, faster and more efficient job, in view of a lot of commentators, of achieving these dire outcomes and the loss of biodiversity and climate change. So it really is a matter for the world to get its act together a bit, and it's much more difficult than that, of course. But at the end of the day, we have to try and identify to the serious people who are prepared to do something about this some measures that might be put in place. And you can see the main thesis from Bosselman's treatise. Nevertheless, the book makes any number of important points and assembles any number of careful arguments in favour of international trusteeship and stewardship of increasingly vulnerable global environments. Only within this type of ethical landscape can there emerge the laws, policies and institutions internationally agreed upon that can and must improve the governance of Earth's environment. Convincing and lucid arguments are put forward to explain why governance by individual nation states is limited in its power to solve or even to control planet-wide ecological problems and catastrophes. And a number of alternatives are therefore being proposed here, including a multi-layered transnational system of democratic governance based on constitutional principles such as those expressed in the Earth Charter, which provides a workable ethical framework. That's assuming people don't want a dictatorship, and we've got a very large number of them on the planet as it is. And of course it can't apply to those people who are only interested in two things: control of the public and stealing all their money for their Swiss bank accounts. That's where the problems are. They will remain until something's done about it by the serious international community. But on the basis of what we're saying, at least this is the beginning of a blueprint of where we may be going in this century. As director of the New Zealand Centre for Environmental Law at the University of Auckland, New Zealand, the author does deliver dire predictions about the future of civilization unless we who live on the planet do something quick about our threatened global environment. Bosselman's arguments are balanced nonetheless by numerous and quite inspiring rays of hope in the form of proposals about how we can act cooperatively and positively to rectify past and current environmental wrongs. He says, quote, "Earth governance describes a new starting point, a new goal, and new ways to get there," and I thank him very much for what he has produced here. Let me conclude. This is an important book. It's new, it contains an impressive array of thoughtful and authoritative statements on the environment and on governance that international and environmental lawyers and academics, as well as heads of governments worldwide, would do well to heed. I don't think it's going to be a plea that is ignored. I'll tell you that now because, as I say, this is recorded in 2015, the publication date is cited at 2015. We just have to look ahead to 10 years' time to realise that we've got to do something, and it will come upon us like the tide coming in rather too quickly unless we start doing something about it. So thank you to all concerned for this book. Quick look at it again. There's the front, the spine and the back. You've got just opening it in the middle, state as environmental trustee. And the concept, of course, I didn't mention this, but the subtitle is Trusteeship of the Global Commons. It means that we are trustees, the beneficiaries, of course, being future generations. Thank you to Klaus Bosselmann and to Edward Elgar for their series of books in this area, very important for all of us. It makes you think deeply as well about where we're going. But I'm very grateful because the debate is continuing. Thank you. Bye-bye.